and follow your eyes into that territory behind the veneer of surface appearance. To snapshot number one, where the real me that you don't know and that might likely shock you should first be seen through the eyes of my mother. Evelyn Outen was her maiden name. She was born on October 22nd, 1896. She married a guy named Reggie. They were tomato farmers on a semi-primitive island on the Bahamas, Cat Island. Twice per year, they accompanied their tomato harvest to the wholesalers in Florida. On the early evening of February 20, 1927, I was born to her in a nondescript clapboard house in the colored section of Miami, Florida, more than 2 months premature. Before the following day had run its course, my chances for survival were reduced to levels at which no reasonable chance remained. With the exception of my mother, everyone, including my dad, was preparing to let me go. In fact, my father, who had already lost several children to disease and stillbirth, was somewhat stoical about the situation. From the sight of me, he wasn't at all sure there was enough there to take hold. An assessment shared by almost everyone who had witnessed my entrance into this life. Thus, my father left the house the following morning for a stroll that ended up at the local undertaker's parlor in a discussion centered around preparations for my burial. Later, he returned to the house with a shoebox that was to serve as a miniature casket for my remains. My mother stood alone against the prevailing opinion, which had by then reluctantly agreed to write me off. She rose from her bed, dressed herself, and set out from the house in desperate search of whatever support she could gather. The reservoir of hope in that unsophisticated woman from a different culture battled against despair hour after hour over a long and fruitless day. Then, as a last resort, when night began to fall and she had nowhere else to turn, she visited a reader of palms, a diviner of tea leaves, the local soothsayer. The two women sat down at a table and looked at each other. After some intense gazing back and forth and much silence, the soothsayer closed her eyes and took my mother's hand. There was more silence, an uncomfortably long silence. And then the soothsayer's face began to twitch. Her eyes rolled back and forth behind her lids. Strange sounds began to gurgle up from her throat. Then all at once her eyes flew open again and she said, "Don't worry about your son. He will survive, and he will not be a sickly child. He will grow up to be..." She paused and didn't finish the thought, but went on instead to say, "He will travel to most of the corners of the earth. He will walk with kings. He will be rich and famous. Your name will be carried all over the world. You must not worry about that child." So for 50 cents, my mother found the support she needed for backing a long shot. She came home and ordered my father to remove the shoebox casket from the house. There would be no need for it. And so it followed for reasons that my mother believed were better left unquestioned that I pulled through.